We are live. We are live. This is Senate Finance, and this is this week. This is the 20th, right? Thursday, February 20th. And we are starting out today with the Northeast Kingdom Day at the State House. And Jen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Should we be here or?
Yeah, come up there so the camera can see you, both of you. Whatever you've got done, pull a chair up.
We'll trade off.
Okay, whatever works.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Jody Freed, and I'm a board member of the NEK Collaborative. And Jen asked me to start by giving you guys a little bit of history about the NEK Collaborative because I've been involved since the late 1990s with the organization. So the organization was founded. It started, I think, in 1996, and officially founded in 1997, and then took a role with the USDA starting in 1999 with Patrick Leahy and the Farm Bill and the establishment of the REAP zones, which is USDA funding that's focused in rural areas, 11 throughout the country, and it brings a bunch of resources into those areas for the purposes of economic and community development. And the collaborative was formed as a nonpartisan group, brought together to try and create alignment between the different sectors and the major parties within the region. And then that group was then used as a lens to look at the REAP zone funds and make sure that it was consistent with the strategic vision of the region in terms of the distribution of those funds. And so over the years, it's been, I don't know what the official total dollars is, but it's been literally tens of millions of dollars of infrastructure money has come in over the past 20 years through the NEK Collaborative. We have a board of directors, which represents each of the different sectors and major organizations in the region. And so you have education, you have healthcare, you have finance. I think there's about 20 different seats on the board. There's also institutions that are there, like our Regional Development Association with NVDA and David Snedeker. You have advisory seats that are like the Vermont Community Foundation. ACCD is there with Tim Tierney. And this entire group then works together to create a strategic vision of community and economic development for the region. That it translates into the northern SEDS for the region. We make sure that document represents the strategic alignment with what we're doing so that it actually translates into the EDA document that then allows for the flow of funds to come into the region. Every year, we make sure that updates from the group and the regional priorities that are brought before us and that the group agrees are our priorities then get moved into that SEDS document through updates. And then every year, every time the SEDS document is fully rewritten, all of our input gets put into that from the board. The board is made up again of those different sectors, but you're also talking about the CEOs in those sectors, really the decision makers in those different areas that really can come in and represent the different sectors so that we can move forward those initiatives. And during different times, for example, when Vermont State University, which at the time was Northern Vermont University, or Linden. There was talk about it closing.
Johnson was, yes, a proposed name.
And so when that came up, the group really rallied around that issue and came here. And one of our primary tools has been, in terms of advocacy, has been NEK Day, where we come in, we make sure the priorities for each year come before all of our representatives and senators here in the state of Vermont in front of the executive branch so that there's a common voice that's brought forward for our entire region. From a rural community economic development standpoint, it's a really a unique model, one that's been recognized by the Boston Fed, by other organizations throughout the country as being something that is really special, I think, to create a unified voice a common vision, the ability to build capacity in a region that has a very large geographic footprint, but very small population footprint, and a great diversity within the different villages within that region. So that's a little bit of the history, and then I know Jen was going to talk to you about the current priorities. So.
And actually, can I just sit here? I don't know whose seat this is. I didn't want to steal it, but
No, no.
can I just sit here?
Randy should be in
Here,
momentarily.
I'll switch.
so
Okay,
just
we'll
pull
switch
up-
out.
You can bring over another chair. Ben.
Yeah, bring over another chair.
Okay. So as Jody said, each year we have NEK Day at the State House. This is our 7th annual. We were live and in person in 2019 and 2020, and then switched to virtual when much of the rest of the world did. So each year we identify our priorities through all of our work over the past year with the folks in the kingdom. And this year this year, I've done a lot of talking today. This year, they are housing. We're working on a regional action plan that will reflect the particular needs of the kingdom. Rural healthcare access, that was a concern of ours certainly before the Wyman report, but we talked a little bit about the impact of that and other information at our press conference today. In the kingdom, we're talking about one of the most rapidly aging populations in Vermont with a lot of distance isolation without a lot of transportation. And so we're hoping that, as decisions are made about healthcare funding and structure in Vermont going forward, the unique needs of each region will be taken into account.
Two of us are on health and welfare.
Excellent.
List.
Excellent. And we were supposed to have some folks talking to you today. And we got shifted a bit from
We
the
had an election this morning.
General Assembly. Yeah,
And
yeah.
everything.
So we're hoping that they can come back and talk to you another time. And as I said, we did address this at our press conference because if you look at the geography of the kingdom, if you look at the distance, the difficulties of travel for much of the year in getting to other healthcare facilities, the hospitals, and the RGHC, that's pretty much it.
So
So
Newport, one of our members on health and welfare is from Troy.
how good.
And we've done use Newport as an example. Hospital, we'll be looking at licensing birthing centers and what impact that could have on a hospital like Newport, and if it gave up its OBGYN service, because their Springfield's already given theirs up.
Yeah.
Where do you go if there's an emergency?
In Newport, where do you go?
Yeah, I think somebody said Copley was the closest hospital.
It would be. Yeah,
That's a long way on a day like Monday.
it is. It is.
Yeah.
It's a long day for much of the year, and it's a long day if you've got a mother and child in distress.
Yeah.
So yes, I do hope that they can rejoin Senate Health and Welfare at another time to talk about this.
We have the vice chair. I will make sure.
Thank
that the
you.
message gets Because they can zoom in. I have to drive. Yeah.
Appreciate that. And our third priority is flood recovery and resilience. The kingdom got hit both years, got hit in 2023 and then got hit twice in 2024, July 10th and July 30th again. And at one point, fully 25% of the flood related 211 reports in Vermont were coming from the NEK. With only 10% of the population. And so we discussed that at our press conference today as well. The need for some changes to state infrastructure to support the local efforts, both in the towns and the organized volunteers. We need some reforms to those systems. We need some different infrastructure in those systems, and we need resilient infrastructure to build back in ways that will be more able to withstand the next disaster.
Infrastructure meaning things like culverts.
Yeah.
Sizing, okay.
Culverts?
Yeah, so you didn't get hit with Irene.
No.
Did a lot of culverts after Irene, and they did
no.
better.
We need to be doing a lot of culverts in the kingdom. And as the Senator Cummings alluded, I actually do own a small business in Waterbury. I work in the NEK. I live in Marshfield. I own a small business in Waterbury, and I've seen firsthand in the last 2 summers, Waterbury flooded, but nothing like Irene, nothing like the devastation. And so we need to be looking at those things in the NEK and how do we withstand the next disaster, a little bit better.
Plainfield lost 11% of its grand list. I think you've probably got some towns that got hit similar.
I'm in Kirby
Yeah,
and we still don't have bridges.
no,
Yeah.
Where we can get around. So you're doing 30, 40-minute drive arounds in some cases to get through normally.
I talked to your select board chair on Saturday, but you guys are getting contracts for it, so.
Soon, we can't wait.
yeah.
But the impact was really significant.
Now, we have, if the bridge in East Montpelier goes out, you have to go to Montpelier to get on board this, and,
Yeah,
no bridges.
absolutely. And in 2023, I live in Marshfield and had to reach out to my state senator for some help on day 8 without running water. So
That's
that's what took
right.
out our municipal water system. So it's in common with the rest of the
They
state.
didn't know
but-
for like 10 days
For
that there
10
was
yes.
no water
Yeah.
to drink in Marshfield.
So that would be a good example, not in the NEK, but a good example of the types of infrastructure changes that we really need within the Department of Emergency Management and other things at the state level as well. So those are our 3 priorities, and I'll be honest with you and say that those were identified before the governor's education plan came out. So since that happened,
Well,
we're
that's
hearing.
where we're spending the rest of our
I
lives.
saw that, so I thought I would mention that. We are sending folks today to both the Senate and the House Education Committees. We
Okay.
have some folks who have come down from the supervisory unions. We have a former member of the State Board of Education who's coming from St. Johnsbury. So we do have some folks who are talking to those committees as well. And we adjust our priorities as events present themselves. And I think we can all agree that 2025, for so many reasons, is kind of a singular year. But 2 of the things that we stress whenever we give testimony or at our press conference is that first, we represent a region that is absolutely wonderful and absolutely challenged at the same time. And when we're talking about funding or policy decisions that affect the entire state, that needs to be taken into account. We have particular needs, we have particular challenges, and a reform plan for the whole state needs to work for the whole state. And so that's one of the things that we continually discuss with the committees that invite us in and with the folks that we have contact with at the state. And the second thing, and Senator Cummings and other committees have been really helpful about this, particularly over the last couple of years, is that each year we reach out and we ask, please remember the NEK when you're choosing witness testimony. And, we are always able to find anybody someone in the kingdom to discuss any topic that you happen to be discussing, whether it's Senate Health and Welfare, whether it's here, whether it's the folks who are going to the education committees. And we are more than willing to help support that in any way we can in the NEK, because there's a lot of native talent, native expertise. And as the regional convener, we're always happy to support your work in any way that we can and to help folks remember the NEK and its needs.
This committee does broadband. Yes. How are we doing up your way?
We are doing, I think, probably about 40% of the kingdom is still without access to high quality broadband. It was 45% 2 years ago at their presentation at our annual regional summit. I want to speak very highly of NEK Broadband, Krista Shute, and the folks who work with her, and Christine Hallquist, who was here today as well and joined us for our press conference, and really working to advance broadband in the NEK, but that remains a critical need. And I know that, they're writing the grants, they're seeking the funding. Too much of it is coming from the federal government. I
We
believe
are a little nervous.
concern,
I
very
was
big
sure
concern.
All your USDA
Yes.
grant people are nervous or hurting at this moment, just from what I hear on the news that,
They are. They are the agriculture programs are taking a large hit. We talked with Senate Agriculture about that earlier in the week and some of the potential impacts there. Thus far, and I'm going to knock on wood as I'm saying this, the rural business development grants that Jody spoke of that have been truly transformational in the NEK because of the REAP zone designation are so far flowing, but nobody can really kind of draw breath.
the checks are really.
Absolutely. Draw down the funding now.
Under the mattress, catch.
And they're dependent upon renewal of the farm bill.
They are,
And
they
so.
are.
Okay,
That would be the next, that one of the next hurdles as well.
yeah, especially for the agricultural community, it's gotta be I mean, and it's been a time of great anxiety, especially for small farmers. I mean, moving your views in this fast as the state is on. Absolutely. That is very close. Meeting questions.
I have a random non sequitur question. What's percentage of homes in the NEK are second homes? Do you have any sense?
I don't, but I can get you that information.
Okay.
I don't, yeah, we'll find that out.
I would assume maybe a few places like JP, Island Pond, maybe.
Burke, there's probably some real concentrations in second homes. And
Around
yes.
the-
Yeah. You will find that out.
Sure. Just that much farther away from major metropolitan areas that it's maybe more Canadian coming over. They used to come over.
Could be, the numbers are down already.
Now, we've got snow this year for snowmobile, and that's big, right?
That helps. Yeah, the
Yeah.
trails are in good shape this year.
Yeah, because we haven't had snow for a couple of years.
Yeah. No, it's much better this year.
Okay, well, that's good.
That was my follow-up question. I was on 4 different Quebec radio and TV stations last week talking about tariffs, and they reiterated their love of Vermont and the citizens of Vermont, but they're also extremely concerned and worried about tariffs and other policies coming out of Washington. And I was going to ask if you've seen any effects, but it sounds like you have already.
We have already, JP is reporting a decrease in, in international tourism and, has issued some very effective communications, I think, to their Canadian friends and customers, encouraging them to come when they feel it's right for them and saying, we're sorry, we can't. But yes, Burke Mountain is also seeing the same effects, and there are some other tourism organizations in the kingdom that are tracking it, some of the downtown development organizations and some others. So yeah, the kingdom will take an additional hit because of that.
It'll be really telling this summer with Kingdom Trails.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's Canadian.
A significant-
Close to you.
Yeah, they are.
And things by this summer could be very different than they are now too, so.
Yeah.
We had the Canadian Consul General here last weekend, as well as just earlier this week, as well as a representative of the province. And they were talking about the concern of people there and in fact, probability of less spending down here. And, they're as concerned as we were concerned.
Absolutely. And actually, we spoke with the Lieutenant Governor this morning as part of NEK Day, and he referenced that meeting that, and I had read the reports about that. So absolutely. We're all very concerned about that.
Yeah, I'll just put a plug in. I'm from Chittenden County, and I attended the afternoon of Catherine Sims NEK Day that she put on for legislators. And it just reminds me of how awesome the NEK is, because I went up there, Senator Chittenden was there, went to the hospital, North Country, went up to Border Patrol, went to downtown, went to the high school there, and every time I take a ride from my house up to there, I just reminded that I really got to get up there more often than
It's beautiful.
just that once a year.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
That was my COVID sanity.
Yeah.
Road to places that I'd never been, and I did a lot of touring.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful, but I believe the moose signs when I see them up there.
Yeah.
Around here, I don't believe them anymore, but up there, I believe the moose signs.
Take that seriously. I've seen one in Greensboro. Yes.
Yeah, we used to see them here in Woodbury. And I think anyone's seen that moose in a while.
Mm.
Yeah, I think the ticks are driving them north is my theory, but yeah. Okay. You know where to reach me.
I do. Yes. Thank you very much.
you.
Really very much appreciate the opportunity.
And thank you for all the hard work that you're doing.
Yeah,
thank
A very
you.
challenging
Thank you.
year
We are-
environment.
Having the school superintendents, we call the Superintendents Association, but if any of your superintendents would like to talk to us on Friday, just have them contact Charlotte
Great, wonderful. Thank you for that.
and, we can get them in. Zoom is a wonderful thing if you live in Bennington in the Kingdom.
Fantastic. Thank
You
you.
don't have
Yeah,
to drive here in a snowstorm.
thank you.
So, we are listening and all of your legislators in and talk to them.
Thank you very much.
So,
Yes, we do. We talk to ourselves on a regular basis. So thank you. And I would like to just introduce Alia Salem. She is with us. She's taking pictures today and that is why she's here. She works for the collaborative as well. So thank you very much. Appreciate the time. I just need to grab my
Yes,
soda.
well, you know, I don't do radio issues. I like the back of the head.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And say put that.
Thanks very much, folks.
We've got a couple of minutes, so I'll let you know what. That's 45 minutes or more to do agenda planning.
We're back at 2:30,
2:30, 2 o'clock.
2:00.
2 o'clock. We have Department of Education
That's something I touch and put.
coming in.
Teacher elephant times.
So we are not on right now. We have the Department of Ed coming in next week. Joint fiscal, we're gonna spend 1 day on income. All right, because we've heard a lot about, at least those of us that are going to school boards, why don't you just go to an income tax? So apparently joint fiscal has a presentation on how much income is there? Where is it? How much is it taxed? How it gets mixed in with the income tax, and there is, and we'll get copies. I guess Manchester did an entire paper on the relation between income and wealth and assets, and so we'll get that for the committee. I think Senator, did you send your paper out to everybody? We have one from Chris Drummond from the Education Council of the States on how other states do that state guarantee or equalizing the grand list, and he's got a bunch of states, so I think Charlotte's got it. We'll get it posted. We had hoped this afternoon that we would get some answers from the department. It has pointed out to us that there are just different ways of lining things up, and everybody knows today. Anyway, good.
Can we speak to it a little bit?
Yeah.
So we all got this and it was directly addressing Senator Cummings' answer. So you'll see it's the response from that Commission on Education presentation we had, those two sharp people. I was really impressed with it. I think it was worth more discussion. It talks about how other states allow for above the foundation amount. And it says 32 other states, there's like 3 categories of approaches. And they all do something different than what the administration has proposed so far. Their proposal of just the state guarantee, I'm not as persuaded that it's the right approach, because I worry that it's just going to, again, incent spending, because you're just going to want to be below it. And if you're not below, you're getting your money's cheaper. You're going to want to motivate more. So we're going to get more gravitating up. My point is other states have actually done more of a grand list assessment. So like a GLA, grand list assessment instead of a CLA. So where they actually look at more grand list heavy districts Well, Texas did this and there's other states as well, but where they actually don't just take from the bottom, but they also look at if it's easier to raise money, then this is what's floated a couple of times. They carve, that makes that money a little bit more expensive, but it sort of adjusts the both, and that additional money feeds back into the whole pool of applying a little bit of an equalization effect when any district spends when any district spends above it, it's either a slightly cheaper or slightly more expensive, and how other states have approached it. So I think it's worth more discussion is all that is.
And we can also have a discussion, as right now the proposal is of statewide equal
Guaranteed.
no, this is the base funding is statewide property tax. Homestead, non-homestead, everybody pays the same rate. Why not? What's the advantage? We can ask that today. Then maybe doing a grand GLA is a way to get at second homes. It's maybe a new version of the old town shark tank. But how, because the way Joint Fiscal understands the governor's proposal, everybody will pay a little bit more into this pot. So there'll be an assessment, all the state base will include money to go into a pot to pay that state guarantee. So when you're assessing money off the below median group to pay their guarantee. So in some ways they're getting double, they're getting hit. So just things that as we work through this, we need to discuss. Let's see. So I'm hoping today we will get some pretty good answers as to how the money flows. What else have we got coming in next week? We've got a whole day on income, and also we're going to talk again about, I asked if they could model just moving up those cliffs. The 90,000 isn't a cliff, the 47 definitely is. That's got a long history, and it will, because it includes your local taxes, if we raise it up to 50,000, that will immediately increase your local property taxes, unless, especially in poorer towns where more people will claim it, because they'll have to either swallow the loss or raise it. Was told that was difficult, or it was a heavy lift to model it. So that's been suggested. Public Assets that's part of their proposal. But they can do it if we want. They won't have it by next week. But they can talk about, Julia will go over again with us the information that was developed for the summer study on using the income tax and how in fact going to an income tax will hurt people that are lower income and paying based on their property value. That the numbers say if they pay based on their income, they're going to pay more. Which I told her to make sure she put out that disclaimer. She just says what the numbers say. Hi, you can come in, just leave the door open. Cracked or open? Open. Open up. It is time for our next guest, and I want them to know I'm here and waiting. That's fast.
Is there an outlet over there?
Should be.
Oh, wonderful.
Waiting. Oh, online?
Yeah,
I
wasn't told.
Don't get no one in the hall?
Oh, yikes, this is worse than the hot seat directly under the screen. They're all online?
They're all online.
4 of them on in the waiting room right now.
Okay,
That's a
well, let's
bummer.
let them in.
I can tap that?
Me?
Oh, since you're right there.
And if they're all online and not sitting in these chairs, you're welcome to come sit in the chairs where you can see them online. Oh, no, Rebecca is here live. We saved the chairs for people and I guess almost everybody is online.
Oh, sure, okay. Do you want me up in front?
Zoe's online. You, oh, you're gonna see.
Well, I mean,
No,
I
that's,
think I'm gonna be doing the least talking,
you're
so
doing the lead talking. Okay.
I'm happy to be a
Because
sideline
I've
guy.
got you, Commissioner Zach is here to. You can sit there. We found out they're all online.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. It's very considerate of you.
So Zoe and John is up there. Okay, so I have Secretary Saunders on first and welcome. And we're hoping today we can get some details. What's in the base funding, what's included in it. Actually, that's another one we're doing next week, right? Base funding, what's included in weights.
I think that's the problem.
That's the following week, okay. But we're trying to understand what's included in the base funding. What that costs. You know, what's our bottom line here? Then you're gonna add the weights and that's going to be, it's my understanding, that is also extra money. Oh, I guess, what do we have to raise? Then how are we going to raise it? And then we got the presentation yesterday on the state guarantee. But still not clear on how that works with governance. Who decides to spend more? Who gets to make that decision? If we stay with your huge districts, there's a huge disparity in there between size and wealth of towns, both financial wealth and property wealth. And so how are you going to use some form of equity there so that the small towns don't get run over and then have to pay the bill? There's a long history of separation for that kind of thing in Vermont. It's how we got towns and villages. So I'm going to give you the floor.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Zoe Saunders, Secretary of Education. I am joined by my colleagues and also our partners at APA Consulting to get into some of these details. So thank you for having us today. We did share several documents that we thought would be helpful to reference during the conversation today. Provided in your materials should be the education funding brief, which provides an overview of all of the different funding resources that are part of this proposal. We also have provided a presentation to walk through the details of what is included in that education funding formula. There are two Excel files that you have access to. One is giving more detail around the adjusted evidence-based model, and that's really looking at the specific costs that are baked in to the base amount. It also details the cost for per student cost and also district level costs that we can extrapolate as well, along with categorical funds. So we know that the purpose of today is to really understand the full universe of funding. So we're prepared to walk through the details around the foundation formula, to walk through the details around the weight states and how those have been established, to talk about the school per pupil costs, which do factor in things like operations and facilities management, to talk about the district per pupil cost, which is really driving the overall resourcing for the central office staff, to talk about the different areas of categorical aid that have been built into this model. You already have had an in-depth overview of the local share, but Rebecca can certainly expand on that should there be any additional questions. Related to some of the mechanics, we also will walk through just the overall process around how the funding would be distributed to the districts. Relative to your last question related to equity and making sure that those dollars are being placed where they're needed most, that's a really important question. And that's also part of the equity and budgeting proposal. And within our overall governance model, we do have that each district needs to abide by that, and also that the State Board of Education would actually review and approve each district's equity budget in alignment with their strategic plan, and ensuring that those resources are being allocated within the district and across the district in ways that are going to be most supportive of student needs. The overall governance structure is diverse by design, and that is to ensure that those decisions around budgeting and policy are really taking into account the different needs of communities. It also could be advantageous to smaller communities with lower property wealth because it allows them to access additional resources across the district and be able to be part of a larger tax base. So there are some specific advantages around that we can walk through. For the purpose of today, I thought we would start with reviewing the PowerPoint presentation and then orienting you to the specific Excel spreadsheets, which serve as the model and the basis of the funding proposal, and then open it up for questions. Would that serve the committee well, or would you rather approach this just as a general question and answer?
I think that would serve the committee well, and I can be corrected. I have one question. Just FYI, this is the second time we've gotten spreadsheets and they don't format on our website. So we've been sent an email, but maybe your tech people could talk to our tech people and make sure that they're, because we printed them out last time and even then things didn't line up correctly. So I'm told if I get far enough down in your presentation that the emails, the spreadsheets will line up. Okay. Okay.
And I do believe our people are working together on that to make sure that it's formatted in such a way that you can add and upload to your site.
Lines do need to add up or line up if you're going to make any sense out of it. I've got one question.
Sorry, thank you, Chair, coming just to set the table. I heard you, Zoe, thanks for being here, everybody. But I heard you mention districts. And I'm just wondering, is this presentation based on the 5-district model? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
all of the information that we're bringing forward is connected to all the policy levers in the full proposal. And so this plan was designed in taking into account that funding, governance, and education quality all were interconnected. And so the proposal does make assumptions around the 5-district model.
Okay. I assume though that if we went to a smaller model, that it could be scaled down. There would be changes, but that a lot of it would be transferable.
So when we walk through, you'll see that there's a certain scale to be achieved. And then from there, you are looking at ratios in terms of per pupil resources that are allocated. So ultimately, when you think about adding more districts, that does create more administrative overhead. It could have the potential to reduce the number of specialized resources, depending on how you're configuring those districts, and might inhibit some opportunity to increase teacher salaries. So I think overall, as we think about the governance, it's important to just identify some of the important objectives and to do that comparison to understand where there may be some losses in terms of efficiency, where there might be some gains. I think those are things that would just need to be thought through as we go through that work. To facilitate that, we're putting together a rubric or a checklist as you're contemplating potential other configurations, to what degree they adjust the resources available, or any other kind of operational considerations that would be factored into that.
Okay.
Because we do know that there is interest.
Or can help us understand, because going from a local town, local vote to almost a district that takes in 20% of the state, it's producing a fair amount of culture shock out in the public. And if we're going to, and so helping us understand, because I don't understand yet, other than laying off some superintendents, how you're going to save, I believe it's $180 million. And then, you know, what kind of efficiencies? I know we've seen one nurse on the PICUS list for 750 students. I'm assuming that is the kind of efficiency you're talking about if you have 750 students in one school. We just had folks from the Northeast Kingdom in, and that could be a challenge for them. So we are all ears at this point.
And I think also the presentation that we did last Friday with New Solutions was really designed to illustrate how these dollars could be funded in a way to meet the local priorities. So, you know, I think it's a different way of thinking about local control as opposed to really focusing on kind of that bottom line and getting that budget over the finish line with your vote. It's around thinking about how do you make sure that these dollars are allocated in a way to best meet the needs of all of the students. And I think what we're illustrating, there's a lot of local control decisions and flexibility within this funding to make adjustments across your district to ensure that schools are resourced in a way and that their programming is aligned to the community's interest. So part of our next step with that modeling is actually looking at the 5 districts. So as you know, last Friday, we looked at a prototypical district as if it were one of the 5 with the same and similar demographic characteristics. Moving forward, we're going to be more refined in that so that we can actually start to model what that would look like. And this is all designed to, you know, align resources in ways that are going to best support best practices in teaching and learning. And the efficiencies achieved are really designed to improve the overall learning opportunities for students. And there are mechanisms in place to facilitate and engage with community input around the budget in ways that are really kind of more observed on a day-to-day in the classroom and in the student school. But we do understand there's questions, and so we are certainly committed to providing more detail and being really concrete around how this funding formula can be applied in a way that produces more opportunities for students and also supports teachers in ways that they've asked. Through our Listen and Learn tour, we heard that our teachers, you know, are doing so much, and that oftentimes there's burnout. And so how can these resources with the district office and other support staff available be there to support with mental health needs and things of that nature? So all of that we're continuing to model so that we can make it concrete around what this funding actually looks like in terms of budgeting and what the experience would be for the student and for the teacher in this model.
Okay, when I read the PICUS report, I thought that most teachers in Vermont would be thrilled if they could get half the support that he had modeled for them. But when you say local control, local decision making, you're talking that 5-person school board, that our district school board, because that's one thing we'd hoped we were going to get last Friday is what are the decision points? The money gets collected by the state. I'm assuming either the tax of the ed department is going to distribute it, as they do now, to the school district, who will then distribute it where? And where who makes are all the decisions made by that 5-person board? Because when you're coming from a 5-person board that represents your 800-person town, that's one thing. When you've got a 5-person board in a district of 20 towns, and they're 50 miles away, that's where some of the culture shock is coming in. That doesn't meet the Vermont experience of local control. And so I think we're trying to figure out, what is your thinking? How does thinking need to change on that? I don't want to be
I would
told
say,
again that that's not the Vermont way. And
so I think in our current context, it's challenging to call it local control when a voter can keep their budget flat and their taxes still increase. And also when there's a lot of other statewide pressures that are outside of the local community's ability to budget for programming that they want for their students. And I think what we heard as we traveled across the state is that there's limited control within the local community to be able to make some of these decisions because of the very pronounced budget constraints on our district. So I do think it's important to kind of talk about local control within that context. And then as you think about the future state, I believe what you're asking is what are the opportunities for community input in terms of the budgeting? And so there would be within the 5 districts, public hearings where community members would have that opportunity to provide input to the school board. Additionally, at the local level, every school would have a school advisory committee that would be involved in providing input on the school improvement plan, which really is the strategic direction for each of the schools. And a lot amount would be set aside as well for those school advisory councils to provide input on what would be in the best interest of students in meeting the goals for the school. So there's a couple of different mechanisms for that type of engagement. We can bring in some additional details around the governance. I didn't share materials in advance for today, but happy to field more questions around that.
okay,
Would it be helpful to move into the overview of the funding at this point?
Yes, I think we should move into that at this point. That's really our jurisdiction.
Okay.
But it all has to get over the hurdles. So just things we get.
You're absolutely right, because it's all
need to have answers to. And it's that culture shock that is probably the biggest hurdle right now. But what you're saying is, I was in local government when we went to a statewide property tax. And that was the realization that many school boards had come to was, why not let the state take it? We don't have any control because we don't have enough money to do anything with. And I haven't heard that in the community, but then from everything I've found out, my districts are pretty in the middle of the pack here. I don't know if that point's been reached yet. I would think maybe last year's 18% vote or increase, we're backfilling those costs, and maybe that's, softening some of the financial realization, but I don't know that I haven't heard that yet. So be interesting to see where we get with it. It's real,
Yeah.
but I haven't heard it yet. Yesterday we heard that outside of Chittenden County, even though we've got a study saying most of our schools are in terrible shape and need significant maintenance, that I think it was no one has passed a bond. You got 3 schools you got 3 projects in Chittenden County, and that's it. Because they can't pass a bond, and yet their roofs are leaking. The debt load in the rest of the state is about nil, at least the bonded debt load for larger projects. There may be smaller ones that are being done with local borrowing or cash, but very little debt out there, long-term debt, and but schools that need serious repair and they can't pass bonds. So that does speak to how difficult financially things are at the local level. So if you can show us how we're going to cut the costs, we may have a chance with this.
Absolutely. And I do want to acknowledge that this is a change in culture, right? And so I think all of these recommendations really came about through a very thorough review and with clear objectives. All of this is centered around improving teaching and learning practices across our state, and providing the most resources we can for our teachers, and the most expansive educational opportunities for our students. And so this is really designed to help us to achieve those best practices. And I do think as part of that culture shift, it's thinking about what does this look like in terms of the student experience. Our Listen and Learn tour, we heard a lot from students and we heard a lot from community members. And it was really clear that they were asking for the state to focus on equity, because in their experience on the ground, they're seeing that certain schools get more opportunities, right? And this is really a chance for us as a state come together and really design a system that is going to expand educational opportunities for students. It is going to ensure equity so that students with similar needs get similar resources, and those kids that need extra help get extra help. That's not currently happening in our system. And so I think there's a lot of benefits to what we're proposing, but understand that it's different. And so the more that we can have conversations and really model what the experience would be like, I think will be helpful. And I do appreciate these questions being in dialogue, I think is part of that process. So if we'll move now to the funding presentation, I will introduce Justin Silverstein and Amanda Brown from APA Consulting to walk through that. Did I miss a question in the room?
Yeah, I have one request. I know you have, and you've graphed out all of your schools. There's colored dots and there's high performing, high cost, low performing. Can you put that into English so we could read it? I think
I believe you're referring.
and what PICA study said is, what are the qualities? And I've been asked this by a local school board. What are the qualities of high performing, low cost schools? What should we be looking for? How do they do it? And that would be a helpful kind of base thing to have.
And I think what you're referencing is from our state education profile, where we did a mapping and looked at, performance versus need and size. So absolutely, we can bring that into the conversation as we walk through what's built in to the adjusted evidence-based model, and what assumptions are in place around what is going to be required in order to have consistent high quality across the state.
Sure.
Thank you for that. Justin, are you able to share your screen?
Okay, now we're looking at different space to find your presentation. Okay, we've got it.
Oh, there it is.
It's on Charlotte emailed this to us so that everything is formatted so you can read it.
Thank you.
Okay, we're on slide 1, so we're good to go.
Great, thank you.
Thank you all for the opportunity to come and present. I'm gonna go through our slides. I'll walk through them pretty quickly. Happy to, if there's questions, and then Amanda's gonna walk through some numbers and some spreadsheets. So this is really just a refresher on the proposal of the funding formula. I think the first thing we want to set is that there's really three components or three kind of different levels of funding that we're going to talk about. One is the base. The base per pupil is coming from the evidence-based research. And what a base really represents is the resources needed for a student with no special needs in a district that has no special circumstances. So that is kind of the foundation of the foundation formula, right? That's what's going to drive everything. We have adjustments for students, and we're really targeting those adjustments either through weights or additional categorical funding. And the weights that we're going to talk about are economically disadvantaged students, English learners, career technical education, and then some of the categorical funding that we'll talk about is special education. And then we also include adjustments for school and district circumstances, and that includes really school size and then geographic sparsity. The next slide here is just laying out the different components that we've proposed within the foundation formula and those then additional categorical funding amounts. And so on the far left is the base funding amount. This is all in fiscal year $25, and that amount is $13,200. When we go to the weighted ADM, or really those adjustments for student and district and school characteristics, each of the boxes is a separate adjustment. They're not being applied against one another. They're separate adjustments. Every long-term ADM student would receive a 1.0 weight. That gets them that base of $13,200. Each economically disadvantaged student is going to receive a weight of 0.75. Each EL student a weight of 1.5. For CTE, we have really kind of two pieces of funding. One is this weight of 1.3. The other is an on-behalf payment coming from the base from districts to the CTE BOCES that we're going to be proposing for a total amount of funding of $25,000. We have kept in the current triple E count as a weight of actually a negative 0.54, and then we have a district sparsity weight, which is right now the same as the capacity weights that are currently in the formula, and then a size adjustment that's applied to each school's enrollment, and we'll walk more into that and how that's been changed. So when you run all those calculations, you get to what we think of as the total foundation funding, and so that's all your funding for base and weights. But of course, you still have additional funding needs, and those include special education funding, and there's current categorical funding for special education, and of course, federal funds for special education. When we looked at the dollars that were being raised through local budgets to kind of fill the gap between federal and state special education funding, we identified additional $70 million that would need to be funded. And so we're taking that into account in our total funding. Similarly, transportation right now is reimbursed at 50% of cost. And so that other 50% was being raised through those local budget decisions. So we're including the full amount of transportation funding in a categorical. And then there's other categorical funds, including state placed students and some other uses. So we're going to dig pretty deep into really what builds up that base amount. And we can talk later, if there's questions about kind of how we got to really most specifically the economically disadvantaged dollars, the EL dollars, and the CTE dollars. And so the base...
Statewide, what's the total base cost?
Do you mean total funding amount?
How much are we going to need to raise in statewide property tax to cover that bill?
So I apologize, Senator. I don't have that specific figure, and I don't know if Rebecca has that number calculated out. We can definitely talk about, Amanda, the total amount of funding that we'll need to raise, and Amanda will be able to walk through that on the spreadsheets.
Okay, this committee's responsible for raising it, so
yep.
I think we're just starting with what do we got to raise as compared to what we're raising now.
Yeah, and we can, I believe, absolutely walk through that comparison piece when we hit the spreadsheets. So just quickly, what makes up that $13,200 base amount for students? How did we get there? We really began with the work from Picus Associates that was done for the JFO. That report was released in September of 24. It's one of 4 approaches that have been used across the country for the past couple decades to estimate the adequacy needs for states. And that approach is currently used to actually drive the formulas in both Arkansas and Wyoming. The approach builds prototype schools and districts. That prototype district is set at 3,900 students. And then the schools are 450 students at elementary, middle, and 600 at high school. You take a set of really nationally recognized best practice and research to create the people that are needed within the school and the central office to identify that base. It also can identify a set of adjustments per student need. We used it to focus on the base. What are some of the key resources that come into the EB model? So kind of what's going on underneath the hood to get to that 13,200. It assumes class size ratios of 15:1 at K through 3 and 25:1 in grades 4th through 12th grade. It assumes specials or elective teachers are there to ensure planning time. It has instructional supports, and I think this was mentioned earlier, Senator. You have an instructional coach for every 200 students. You have an interventionist at every school that starts to help provide the tier 2 interventions that are needed with MTSS. You have a library media specialist. You have additional supports in the school of counselors, one per every elementary school, and then one per 250 students in the secondary. And this was a nurse it for every 750 students. You have principals and assistant principals at each school, secretarial help, and then you have some what they call supervisory aides who are there to cover duties so teachers protect their planning time. Working with AOE, we made some recommendations on how we would adjust that evidence-based model, which really is looking at the national research for the Vermont context. And we did that using a couple different pieces of information. A big piece of that when we're looking at the Vermont context was listening to teachers and families and community members as we did the Listen and Learn tour last fall and winter. Then APA has had the opportunity to work with PICUS Auden in a number of states, and that includes Michigan, Maryland, Colorado, and Washington, D.C., to apply the evidence-based approach and other adequacy approaches. And when you do that, you often reconcile the different identified resources between the different approaches. And there's a couple places where there's common adjustments kind of up from the EB baseline to get to what is needed for students in the current kind of educational context. And then we also made some adjustments really focused on CTE and college and career readiness in both the middle school and high school. And so quickly, those recommended adjustments include a slightly different staffing model for middle school. We are actually making it closer to high school. It allows for block scheduling, which actually then allows for more robust course offerings, including that career exploration that we've discussed. We've added some high school teaching positions to, again, really have a robust college and career readiness coursework. We added additional student support. So if you go back a couple slides, we talked about really the focus on student support was for guidance counselors. What we're seeing nationally and what we heard loud and clear with the Listen and Learn tour is also those behavioral and mental health supports that are needed for students. So we added staff who could take care of that for families and for students. The evidence base does not include an assistant principal at elementary middle. We added that at both levels. We took down the staffing ratio from that in the 700:1 level down to 500:1, which aligns with the Vermont education quality standards. We've increased teacher salaries in our model from what were used, which were statewide average salaries. And then we've also looked at having additional funding at both the middle and high school for CTE coursework that would be happening at every school across the state, not just in the centers.
Okay, we've got a couple questions before you go on.
Perfect.
Senator Beck and then Senator
Yeah.
Hardy.
Justin, when you say in the first bullet point there, needed planning time for staff, what contact ratio are you using?
So for the middle and the high school, we are basically assuming teachers would teach 3 out of 4, ensuring that you could have a 4-block schedule. So teachers effectively are teaching 75% of the course.
75%.
Yeah, 75%. Yep.
Thank you.
Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple of questions on or 3 questions on this slide. First of all, the staffing ratio or your first bullet point about making middle schools more like high schools. That is super concerning to me. Middle schools are very different from high schools and their needs of the students and the developmental levels. So can you say a little bit more about that and what you mean?
Yeah, and the goal here, Senator, is to make the staffing more similar, not to make the actual educational practice necessarily more similar. In the base evidence-based model, that's in the PICASOD model, the staffing includes a 20% additional staffing for electives versus at the high school, it's 33%. The 33% allows for that 75% ratio that we just talked about. The 20% wouldn't allow for that. And what we do know is that though middle schools are providing education different than high schools, there are a number of middle schools who would like to be able to have a block schedule. And what the goal here is to ensure that the resources would be available for that to happen.
So
And so it's providing the flexibility for middle schools to have the kind of the schedule that they find best fit.
okay, so the bottom line is that in your model, you're providing more resources to middle schools, not less. Okay. And then the teacher salary bullet point, one of the concerns I've heard is that if you're using, the same teacher salary across the state, it does mean that, yes, some teachers are going to get a pay raise, but there are teachers that would get a pay decrease. And how functionally are you doing that, especially given all of the existing contracts?
I can chime in on this. The intent is not to give pay cuts. The intent is to increase the overall average teacher salary across the state and to make sure that regardless of where a teacher works, they can get a competitive salary. Right now, we're seeing that there is great disparity in terms of teacher pay. And some of our higher needs communities tend to pay teachers less. So we will be looking at opportunities to have, statewide salary schedule. We have been researching how other states can accomplish that to ensure that there is more parity in terms of teacher salaries across the state, and that there can be portability as well with those salaries. So the intent is to overall raise the average teacher salaries for the state of Vermont. And there's not an intention to cut salaries if there are teachers that are, right now at a higher pay scale. You're pointing to the need for that negotiation process. And I think that's where the minimum teacher salary schedule would be beneficial. And that's something that we are exploring.
Okay, so nobody would get a pay cut, but probably a lot of people would get a pay raise. So because there's a disparity now. So then the savings that you're anticipating would be through, since 70+% of school budgets are personnel, the savings you're anticipating would be through layoffs.
As we walked through last Friday, a big part of this model is achieving the class size that's built into this foundation formula, and also staffing precisely to enrollment and to student needs. I think as you're talking about the overall staffing, it's important to put that in context in Vermont. We continue to struggle to fill the positions that we are recruiting for. We are seeing a big increase in the number of teachers on provisional licenses. We also see a lot of vacancies in our central office staff. So a lot of this is really also right-sizing to the workforce that we have. And we will get more alignment in terms of consistency around student to teacher ratios in this plan.
Okay, so
And
you're
in doing that, we're able to pay teachers more as well. Yeah.
Okay, so your answer is yes, thank you. The next question is that the adding additional per student funding to provide CTE coursework in middle and high schools, is the intent to include CTE coursework in this quote unquote regular schools? And how does that, wouldn't that further compete with our career and technical centers and make them less stable? I still don't understand how CTE fits into this model. And if you're providing a weight for CTE, is that meant to fund the CTE in these schools, or is that meant to fund the CTE centers?
Senator, great question. Really, we're thinking these as two different pieces. We have the CTE weight and the funding structure for that that really is focused on the centers, keeping the centers as really robust opportunities for students and creating more kind of equity of opportunity at the centers by funding them, more through the BOCES and making those decisions there. The thought, and so there's no goal to strip down or to create this competition with the centers. The centers tend to have higher cost coursework. So one of the things that we have identified, looking at the CTE, is there are opportunities to have more, one, to just expand the grade opportunities for students. So right now, generally students are only in 11th and 12th grade when they're in the CTE centers. You can, I think, waiver in 10th grade, but it's pretty constricted. And so the goal is to have some of your, I'm going to say lower cost, but it's just really lower equipment based programs, though we know there's some more robust high schools who might have, some higher cost programs. But so we're not going to fund CTE students at the traditional schools with this additional weight. That's not the goal. It's to put in additional resources to have some programming there. We've identified things that can be done, mostly on the computer. We still think the BOCES will help lead this and create a comprehensive approach to CTE across the state that's really focused on the state's workforce development goals. But more importantly, just to get opportunities, especially at the middle school and in 9th and 10th grade, really going for students so we keep them hooked. One of the things we heard really clearly in the Listen and Learn tour is that districts are really struggling to kind of find the why for certain students in that 9th and 10th grade, kind of as they hold on to get to sometimes the CTE center. We heard that across the state from lots of different leaders. And so part of this is really trying to build those opportunities for kids that keep them really hooked on school.
Okay. So just to be clear, so the weight is for funding the CTE coursework in schools. There's a different funding mechanism for the CTE BOCES Center?
Yeah.
No.
The weight is only for the centers. It is the FTE of students who are at the centers. This is just additional dollars in the base that will create more robust, really both flexible pathways and CTE coursework at the traditional schools all the way down through the middle school.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
I just wanted to quickly add that recommendation, that CTE bullet point is something that came out of a CTE study that we had submitted to our education committee last year. So I just wanted to throw that out there. That's a recommendation.
I thought we had done some legislation on that, Chris.
Thanks. Zoe, I just want to confirm what I heard to your answer to Senator Hardy's question about laying off teachers. What I heard was through vacancy savings, not being able to hire teachers, having them on, is it provisional licenses? I don't know.
Yeah, provisional licenses.
Licenses. It wasn't giving out pink slips. It was utilizing vacancy savings, not being able to hire folks in different parts of the state, and now increasing teacher salaries to ensure pay equity across the state. So if we have a teacher that's in one area of the state and wants to go live in the Northeast Kingdom, from the folks we just heard from, they could do that without having to take a significant pay cut. Is that kind of what I was hearing from you?
That's the intent. We want to make sure that teachers across the state can earn a competitive salary. And we see right now that there is a big equity gap when we look at teacher pay across the state of Vermont. As we are moving into this future model, there is natural attrition that we would expect to have within this plan. There is turnover that we would expect to have within this plan. And those are all pieces that we would build into that proposal to really make sure that we are staffing at appropriate levels that really align to the workforce that we have in Vermont. We often talk about having trouble filling these positions, right? And so this is an opportunity to make sure that every student in every classroom across the state of Vermont, it increases their likelihood of having a high quality teacher within their classroom, and that teacher is getting the support that they need from the other resources that are available in their school and in their district. But yes, as you think about the mechanics of it, there's natural attrition built in, there's assumptions around turnover and some vacancies that have not been filled that would not be part of the new staffing matrix. So that would all be part of that transition planning.
Okay.
I have a question on the same topic, and I hope don't see it in your slides, so I'm wondering if you could expound upon it while we're on the discussion point. There is a large wage difference across counties in Vermont. I'm looking at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Chittenden County, the average wage was about $1,281 a week, and the lowest one would be Grand Isle, $874 a week, a swing of about 40%. My concern being that I represent Chittenden County, which has a higher wage rate. How is your model adjusting for the wages that are currently paid and will probably continue to be paid different amounts across the state depending on the counties that they're residing in? Do you have any CPI adjustments or any other adjustments for what you can expect in your model that teachers are going to demand a premium for just based on the market that they're in?
I think there's two pieces to that, and I can allow Justin to expand. So one is thinking about a minimum teacher salary so that there is that consistency across the state. The other is the cost of living adjustment, typically and lives outside of that in other models that we've looked at. So I'll allow Justin to elaborate on how those both policy levers could play in.
CLA, not CPI, my apologies.
Yeah, I would say, just most explicitly answer your question, we do not have an adjustment for regional cost differences in the model right now. There are, and I can never decide if it's 13 or 14 states who do have such an approach. But again, it's around that 14 number. So the vast majority of states don't make that sort of adjustment in their formula. There are a couple of approaches that are available to do that. I think the comparable wage index, and there's an index called SWIFT, C-SWIFT, that is actually produced by the National Center for Education Statistics. Admittedly, if it's still online, that would provide some of that information. And again, that really is both but it's not a cost of living adjustment, right? It's not looking at cost of living, it's looking at cost of comparable wages. And so it really would take a look at what do you pay someone with a similar set of educational background. So I always use like accountants, right? An accountant needs a bachelor's degree, and what is one community pay that kind of representative group of employees versus another, and then you could make an adjustment. But it's again a separate adjustment that you would apply. And I think there's some question, and I think I hear you that you're seeing differences regionally. At the same time, it's a relatively small geographic overall footprint compared to some other states. So again, most states have decided not to do that, but some states absolutely have decided to go that way.
Closing comment.
Yeah.
Just to wrap that up, I have to give voice to the school board chair and district, the largest district in the state. CBU has run the numbers and worked with you, and I'm very concerned that if we don't do an adjustment on labor with this formula, as I'm reading the interpretations, which I know a lot of this is fluid, this could translate into a $20 million cut on a $100 million budget if we don't adjust for existing labor rates that are different in Chittenden County than they are in Grand Isle or Essex. So this is going to be dominant for me as this conversation goes forward.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The other thing I want to mention is that, we are having conversations with Vermont NEA around this as well. I think we all share a goal of ensuring that our teachers get a competitive wage and that there is equity across the state. What you're calling out is that right now we don't have that. And so as we think about the more refined modeling, and we do this work within the reformed kind of 5-district model, there will be attention paid in terms of the salaries adjustment based on the current pay scales so that we can do that modeling. As you know, we're already working closely with that district. And I think it's important to put it in perspective that it's a different type of budgeting as well. So some of those resources that may be centralized right now within the district would be part of the larger region, right? And so it's a different way of budgeting. And all of this is designed to ensure that we are resourcing our schools to promote student outcomes and that we're equitable across the state. I think we all share in that goal of making sure our teachers in all parts of Vermont can earn a competitive wage. And right now, we're not seeing that that's the case.
Okay, just to finish, I'm looking on these slides at the end game, at where we're going to be and how it will work when we get there to this idealized district. But right now, in the central Vermont, no matter which Winooski Valley, central Vermont, I've got multiple union districts, school districts. I've got, in those districts, there's multiple elementary schools, none of whom come close to your numbers, none of whom can house another school. So we are going to have to, at some point, be able to map out a transition plan. We had presentations on school construction, school funding, and it looks like that's going to have to be done by the school district. But you don't build schools overnight, even if there are modular schools now, like there are modular apartment buildings. We heard about E3 design and build, multiple schools, but all of that takes time. And so we're going to have to build a transition into this that might help with the culture shock. We did Act 46, and I think we can say it was not very successful because we just relied on local schools to do what we thought they should do, and they didn't. And so I'm hoping that once we finish this description of where we're going, that we can then talk about the map as to how we get there, because like any map, there's several different routes you can take. I like maps. But that's another discussion we're going to have, because I think that's where a lot of the questions, it's such a huge change. And people are saying, well, next year we aren't voting and all our schools are closed and everything changes. So I think we need to work on transition once, and we'll finish getting through this, but just what we'll have you in for probably next.
And thank you for, surfacing those concerns. I want to make sure we can address those today and saying that this plan is a practical plan, and it also assumes that it is multi-year. So the modeling that we have done assumes that in the fiscal year 28, that we will have a very similar school portfolio. We're actually modeling that into our approach, understanding that any decisions around school consolidation would take a longer period of time. And we also would have additional criteria available, as we've talked about, in terms of clarifying those schools that are small by choice versus small by necessity. You had called out some of the considerations around facility being an important input, along with, the remote nature of where that school might be situated. So as we go through the model, I just wanted to emphasize that we are building into our assumptions that our school portfolio will stay relatively similar in terms of the number of schools. The operation of schools is where we're talking about some adjustments in order to be aligned to best practices for teaching and learning. So I just want to emphasize that this is multi-year, that this is being practical and understanding that these type of changes do take time, and they also do require the new districts and the new school boards, along with community, to be involved in that planning. So when we get into the spreadsheet a little bit deeper later into this presentation, we'll be able to show you how we've built in those adjustments for size of schools and how they're part of our modeling.
Trying to do a question.
I really just have an overall question. As I stand back at a distance and look at this, I look at the slide that's up right now, and the only thing that's on the slide is no subtractions, there are only additions of staffing, and that the major potential savings come from the elimination of administrative staff in the multiple districts, one. And that's assuming that, you don't have 60 or 70 people buying toilet paper. You only have 5 at this point. And that beyond that, the additions are almost in every area. And then when we take a look at salaries, at least what I'm reading it is that the salary levels go up. They don't get averaged. Are there any teachers that you see right now who are overpaid in Vermont? Did the data indicate, for example, and so is it that everything gets rounded up to the highest pay level at this point?
I'll allow Justin to expand. The modeling builds in an average increase in teacher salaries. And so I think what you're pointing out is that there is quite a range. So all of that would need to be taken into account when you think about negotiating contracts within the new districts. And I'll allow him to kind of expand further on that piece. In terms of really the subtractions, this plan builds in a lot of efficiencies and ensures that we can invest our dollars in areas that are going to yield the best opportunities for students and achieve equity in our education system. With this proposal, I want to note we're still going to be one of the top spenders in education in the country. But we're going to be investing those dollars in ways that are smarter and that are going to be more targeted towards improving student opportunities for students and supporting teachers. Right now, we do have we are, I think, number one in terms of the number of teachers to students. So we have some of the most adults in the building compared to how other states operate their schools. And so as we look at, class size and establishing some consistency there, that will make some adjustments in terms of how we're delivering education in schools across the state. And Justin, do you want to expand any further on that?
I understand the theory, but as I say, I see ads, I see the notion that the class sizes are going to be somewhat larger. They're certainly not going to be the largest in the country by any means. Is that basically when you say you'll get efficiencies in the system, you're adding people, you're adding schools and schoolrooms, both of which have cost. You're adding salary rather to people who are not at the desired salary level. It's all going up and it's not being averaged. I'm just wondering, I assume you've got some data in the models you've done that show that you are achieving savings by doing these things.
I think what might be helpful is to have a follow-up and we can bring in New Solutions K-12. So you heard Nate Levinson provide a presentation last Friday. He's had a lot of experience working with school districts across Vermont to really optimize their budget. And so he did share last Friday some really concrete examples around how with doing more strategic budgeting, that there were really large cost savings in districts that he's worked with across Vermont. A lot of those best practices that he has outlined on Friday are built into this model. And so we would be providing support around budgeting. We have started to do that as an agency. We've ramped up our support around budgeting this cycle, and that would be very much intensified through this transition period to really support the schools and within the new districts of doing budgeting that's going to be able to achieve the best practices and ensure that schools are resourced appropriately. I think what I'm going to ask for is really concrete examples around what does that look like. And I want to call out that we have some schools that in districts across the state that are really optimizing their budgets and they're really utilizing all of these tools and mechanisms to their full effect. And we have other schools and districts that aren't. And so this process is really designed to ensure we can have that consistency and continuity of achieving scale so that we can have higher quality on opportunities and outcomes for our students. We can certainly have a follow-up where we can kind of walk you through examples around what does that mean in terms of what the recommended adjustments might be for staffing or for programming in that context. And we started to do that last Friday, but we can circle back with some greater detail.
Okay, the one job employee I don't see up there are para educators. And we know we have small classes, so we have a high number of teachers. We have micro classes in some schools, many schools. So we have a teacher student, but the national numbers are adults. So we have a nurse for 100 students rather than 750, because there's 100 students in the school and those kids get sick or injured. But we also have paraeducators. In some schools, it seems like every other child has their own para, which is the way we've kind of been dealing with some special ed. And I'm assuming, hoping that if we in fact are not budgeting for paras, and I haven't seen them in here, that we will be providing better training and support for teachers. And better training and support for special ed teachers, or we will just, with better salaries, be able to attract more skilled special ed teachers. What,
Yeah.
I mean, what is the thinking around paraeducators?
Yeah, Senator, the base model, you're absolutely right, does not provide for any paraprofessionals or at the base. So for a student with no special needs in a school, in a district with no special circumstances, it does not provide for paraprofessionals. That it is assumed, and we know there will be paraprofessionals within the special education funding. So that of course will be in place and will be needed. And that is based on IEPs and everything else. It really is most specifically not having any paras in the base. That is true and is part of the EB model and the national research that they pull from for their work. But that does not mean there will not be paras in schools. We know that will be, and they'll be very closely related with special education.
But significantly fewer in some schools. Okay. Let's continue.
I would also point you to the education funding report that we provided several months ago, which explains our funding formula and also compares it to other states. Within that, we do have a section that talks about the Vermont's historical reliance on paraeducators and also some recommendations around best practices, which are very much aligned with recent legislation that was passed by the General Assembly. And to your point, yes, there would need to be a greater support. Part of the intent here as well would be you would have additional special education resources or the director at that central level as well. We know we see a lot of turnover of that position in central offices across the state, and it is often hard to recruit special educators that are certified.
Okay.
And senators, I want to make sure we can get to the spreadsheets because I think that's going to answer some of the questions. So I'm going to go pretty quickly if there's, so please ask questions. We just quickly wanted to show the size adjustment. It is similar to, at some school size points, similar to the adjustment that you see in the current tax capacity weights. But what you'll see, it's now a continuous variable. And effectively for any school at 450 or smaller, there would be an adjustment in the near term to allow for this transition of the system. And effectively what you'll see is at 50 students, each student would raise about 35% more than the base. And that goes down, of course, to 0 at 450. But continuous variable. And again, in the short term, applied to all small schools below 450 with the understanding that there'll need to be a criteria for what is necessarily small going forward in the future as districts have time to right size. This slide just shows kind of where the different dollars are coming from. The majority of funding will come from that $13,200 base. The second biggest pot of the foundation formula is the economically disadvantaged funding. And then we have the categorical funding and district sparsity and school size are all around 3.5%. EL is about 2%, and CTE, though, would be going to the BOCES, that weight would generate about 3% of all the funding.
And just to name that 3% is the adjustments to the categorical funding. So the increased funding we're recommending, say for special education and for transportation, it is not the entirety of categorical fundings. It's just to try to make a little bit of an apples to apples comparison with your current ed spend.
I do have a quick question.
We have a question.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit to the district's varsity weight? It seems as though that's incentivizing small schools, and having spent the last 2 or 3 years working on school construction, one of our goals was to right size the system and really maximize the numbers of students in school. So is that something that will taper off over time, or I guess I'm just curious as to what the thinking was there.
Yes, Senator, on the specifically really on the school size adjustment and going from what now is actually a necessarily small to the overall in a number of places, including school size, but also in special ed and also in transportation. The thing we really wanted to ensure is that in FY28, these new districts weren't kind of put on their back foot and not able to fund current costs, right? So, and current structures. So you're absolutely right. The formula itself, we think, would stay permanently because you're going to always have some necessarily small settings, but you need to put in a criteria of basically when we'd say probably within 2 fiscal years, you kind of turn on the necessarily small part, which is we can identify that this school is in a place where they can't go someplace else, and you're going to need some sort of adjustment for their cost.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's continue.
Okay, quickly, we're getting to some comparison numbers, not the totals, but some per pupil. What we're just trying to highlight here is that our funding, looking at the current FY25 ed spend per long-term ADM versus what we are proposing, would be about an 8% cut at the about an 8% cut. When you look by district size, it's about the same percent cut regardless of district size. So that really doesn't differ. What stood out to us the most is that these district need categories. So we grouped each district into one of 3 needs based on their free reduced price lunch count or percentage. And what you'll see is that our lowest need districts would take the biggest percentage cut. The moderate need districts would take a similar cut, just a little bit less. But the highest need districts are effectively spending today what we would be expecting them to spend in the model. And so that really comes back to this theory of who's taking advantage of their tax capacity in the current system. And it seems to be that the tax capacity is being most taken advantage of. It sounds like the wrong word, but folks are using their tax capacity most in the lowest and moderate need districts, and your highest need districts really are not generating as many dollars in comparison to the tax capacity that they have.
We have a question.
Yeah, are you using in your model free and reduced lunch as a measure of poverty, or are you using the direct certification data?
So the actual student counts are the same across, current counts are the same in our modeling of the actual total funding. We are using the free reduced price lunch simply as a indicator of need for this comparison. Amanda, is that a fair way to say it?
Yeah, and I think it's actually a little simplistic that we're calling it FRL here. It also takes into account available information from direct certification. The way it was described to me, it was kind of any means of identifying the students that are in this category that they have available, which can include direct certification and not just
Okay.
the form.
That's helpful to know, because the free and reduced lunch, if you're just using that, that's a narrower category. And so it might be helpful to actually change your slides, because that has concerned a number of people.
Perfect.
Narrowing the poverty measure.
Thank you.
Just can I ask a question? So I think I heard you speak to this on the previous slide. I think I heard the secretary say it earlier, but I think you said that the small school adjustments were intended to be phased out as it's deemed or determined whether or not they're small by choice or by necessity. I will say, if I was a budget manager for a school district right now, I'd be really scared of seeing these numbers and where I fall, what this is going to be. Could you elaborate on just general contours of what you're thinking timeline for both implementation and when we might, as earliest as possible, transition to this notion of this foundation formula, as well as the latest sort of scenario you have, as well as overlaying that with how those small school adjustments would peter out on that general time frame thinking that you have in mind would help me understand where you're all coming from on this.
Yeah, so I'd say a couple things. One, the policy proposal envisions the foundation formula being in place in the way we're discussing it in FY28. So that would be when this would go into place. I think it's important to note that currently that this proposal would provide additional funding for more small schools than are currently provided for in the current formula as far as tax capacity, right? We are any school below 450. Whereas right now it's actually only any school below, I think, 250, and then only if they're deemed necessarily small. So this would be more funding targeted towards smaller settings in the short term. I, speaking as Justin in APA, think, having, a minimum of kind of a 2-year window for districts to be able to start to right size, but not wanting to go too much further, right? The longer you go, the harder. Often we have seen in school finance formulas where it never goes away, if that makes sense, right? The longer the legislature kind of says, well, we'll hold on for a while, then 15 years later, you have these kind of hold harmless pieces in place.
Thank you.
Expand on that a little bit as we go into the detail around this work. Is the adjustments have been done in a very thoughtful way, and so we actually have a comparison table based on if you have fewer number of students in the building, what that would mean in terms of the additional cost per student, but also what that might mean in terms of your ability to deliver services. So there are some really important choices that are made throughout that process. The other piece of this is the accountability framework will evaluate the degree to which schools are financially viable and also can achieve education quality expectations. So that's built into that overall approach. So it's not just around enrollment. And as we're thinking about this model, it's connected to the larger accountability framework that ensures that schools have the finances to ensure there is operational continuity and that they have the resources to be able to, have high quality educational opportunities and students achieving at high levels. So it is a more comprehensive approach that is beyond just kind of evaluating size by just evaluating size. It's really evaluating the overall educational experience. We know that size is a piece of that because that's an important component of the funding. And we'll walk through what those adjustments mean. The other piece is you think about district-wide planning, there might be just different decisions a district makes, and they prioritize that with their school board around what is most important for that portfolio of schools. So this is a very multifaceted approach that it's ensuring it's going to be practical, that we're going to make sure that we have high quality public schools for every child across the state, and that there's enough funding within this framework to make some different choices for different communities and expanding programming. But it is important to note that, once you get to a certain size, it may be hard for that school to be able to deliver on the array of programming, and it may be challenging financially as well to operate. And those are all factored into the overall approach. But part of what we're saying here is that we know this needs to be multi-year. We know that it's not just flipping a switch. And so that's why, as part of the modeling, there is some assumptions that there would be a similar portfolio in terms of number of schools within the first year of this implementation.
Your answer was not nearly as scary as I was anticipating. So that's workable. Thank you. And I think that'll be a big point of discussion.
Great. And if it's okay with the committee, I was going to kind of skip over the last 2 slides, mostly because we've talked about each of these bullet points in different ways during our discussion. And just wanted to make sure we had time to look at the spreadsheets and get to some of those comparison figures that were asked about early on.
Okay. I think that moves us forward.
All right, with that, I'm going to share a couple spreadsheets on the screen that I think will be helpful. The first one. This one. The first thing that you should see, does it look like it says adjusted EB model?
Yes.
Yes, great.
Pretty small though.
Is it pretty small? Let me make it better for everyone's eyes.
That's better.
Is that a little better? Okay. So starting actually, I'm gonna go over here. The very first tab that you'll see on the farthest left is what we were talking about during the presentation. What recommended adjustments did we make to that EB model? And again, these are recommendations to the EB model and not necessarily changes to current practice, which might be different. But you'll see each of those outlined, so I'm going to kind of keep us moving forward. The next tab is the salaries. And again, this is where we talked about the model uses average salaries by position. And we made an adjustment to increase the average teacher salary for core teachers, elective teachers, interventionists, and coaches. So you'll see that additional salary that's being highlighted there. Places where it's green is kind of where we made a change, so to draw your attention to that. It also shows you the benefit rate that was used. So then the next tab is a tab called Adjusted EB Base. And this is similar to what you saw in the policy brief in terms of at the elementary, the middle, and the high school of those typical sizes, how much staffing was identified through the research as being what's needed to serve students. Places in green are places we made adjustments. Places in blue are places where we made a decision around kind of a floor or a ceiling. So this example, a nurse per 500 students might have generated more than one nurse at the high school of 600 students, but assuming you would have 1.0 there. So you'll see positions, how much each position costs, what that total amount generates. And then there's a block on dollar per student resources that includes accelerated programs, those additional dollars for CTE that we've talked about, flexible pathways, PD, instructional materials, all the non-people costs at the school level are there. It adds up to a total amount for the school, which becomes the total school level cost per pupil. There's two other figures that you then add on top of that to get to the total per student. That'd be your M&O, so maintenance and operations, and that's just your ongoing maintenance and operations. That's not anything about capital projects or deferred maintenance. But just what you would need in the funding formula every year to keep your schools going. And then central office per pupil resources. In the policy brief, you can see the staff that's allocated. And I think the K-12 Solutions presentation did a good job of talking about how do you potentially staff within this dollar amount. But then you'll see, so for every school level, there's a total cost that comes up. If we skip over to this tab called base and size weights, you can see that elementary base amount, the middle school, high school, how it is combined together to create a K-12 number, the inflation amount that we used. And Justin, I'd look to you to be the one to explain. It's the NEEP, the index that you typically use in the legislative offices. And that's how we get to that 13,200 number for the base. Coming back to the three tabs that I skipped over. To create that size adjustment, we also thought about how would resources perhaps be different if you were talking about smaller schools. So in this example tab, the elementary, the base is an elementary of 450 students, which we know is much bigger than many schools in Vermont. So we also looked at what would the resources be at a school of 300, 200, 150 students. And you can see places where we made some adjustments that are in blue that might put a floor on a position. So you might still have, a principal at a 200 student school, whereas if you had proportioned down from 450, you might have less than that. So those are places we put in floors, recognizing that you have different economies of scale. We also made adjustments looking at differences in M&O costs by size. And from all this, you can see at the bottom of this example, the the relationship between that school size and what we would think about at the base. So how much more expensive is it to run a 300 student school? So it's 6% more 10% more when it's at 200, almost 30% more when you get to 100. So we did that exercise at the elementary, middle, and high school. If we go back to that base and size weights tab, you can see, again, those relationships. What I was just talking about, 6% more here, 10% more here, 27. We compared those against the current scale tax capacity weights that are in your system and found that the AAR adjustments from 2019 were pretty similar to what we were coming up with. So we then looked at all of that to create that size adjustment that Justin had shared of putting those kind of discrete data points in to make a continuous variable to address for size for any school less than 450 students. And again, it generates up to another, I think at the 50 student school, 35% more was about another $4,000 or $5,000 per student based on size. So again, recognizing smaller settings cost more to operate. So that is the EB model of how did we get to the base amount. So it lets you look at it and say, if you use different salaries, if you use different class sizes, ratios, how would that change? From there, we switch over to a second spreadsheet, which is the streamlined model spreadsheet. And I'm going to make sure I can actually see it. Okay.
We have them.
There,
She sent it.
Charlotte sent them at 11 this morning.
We'll go on the website.
Yeah, I've got slides, but I didn't get, let me see if there's another email.
Oh, is there, are we missing copies of this one?
There,
And when you open, I got one at 11. Oh,
that should, yeah, that should have the,
If you click on the email, wait.
I love your spreadsheets and I already want that current districts. I kind of want to update it with the VSBA regions just to see how these numbers shake
Just
out.
see how the next one. Yep. I think that can be a next step of modeling another scenario. So while
Alright.
everyone's finding this one, this model takes, so the prior spreadsheet was how did we get to the base? This one is how do you take that base and the weights and apply them to your current, both the tabs you'll see are for comparison purposes, current districts, current SUs, and the proposed 5 regional. But you'll see that 3,200 or 13,200 carries over here in the base, each of these weights. And you'll see that we, in our model, do not have weights for elementary, middle, or high school because we are assuming in that 5 district configuration that all of your districts are operational K through 12. So it's a place you could make a different decision if that was needed. We have the district sparsity weight or sparsity adjustment, school size. We do not have a district size adjustment, again, assuming.
Wait, where are you? Which spread? I'm not, which spreadsheet are you on and we have?
This one is called Streamlined Model version 2.
Oh, I don't think we have that one, do we?
No.
2 came in the email and I have that one as well in that same email.
The streamlined model. I have both of them up, but I don't. There's one called district level impact analysis of foundation formula.
What Charlotte sent us?
1107, it's.
Yeah.
Charlotte sent us that.
Oh, yeah, I know.
1108.
And there's one called EDU adjusted ED model.
And right below it, keep dragging down. If you're an Outlook, you need copy streamlined model. Other attachment. I'll put it to you right now. We need to get those things on the website, but I love spreadsheets, so keep coming.
I do too. I love a good spreadsheet. Senator, I'll let you keep looking for that one. And if we need to resend it out, we'll make sure to get that.
No, I got it. I think.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, so this front page is really, again, where that base and all the weights are sitting. It allows you to, if you wanted to change a weight, change a base, it then models what does that look like. The next tab is just and I have it filtered, so you know. It's just the organization info, all of your current districts, what county they're in, what SU, what region they're in. The current schools is each school in the state, and this is where we're applying that formula that we talked about on the front end. So if you looked at the school size weight, this is that formula that we've looked at. So based on your size, what would be your weighting per student? How many additional students does that generate as long-term weighted ADM? How much money does that generate per student? That then kind of feeds into the next 3 tabs. So the first tab you'll see is current districts. So again, all of our the formula is designed based on the 5 districts, but for trying to do some sort of apples to apples comparison to what does that look like to your current district now, that's what this tab is doing. So it's not recommending keeping your current districts, it's just showing you by district, how does it compare? So you'll see each of your districts, again, their county, their SU, and their region. These 2 are important because then it's how we feed into the next 2 tabs. How many students does it have in each category, including EEE, pre-K, elementary, middle, secondary, how many economically disadvantaged students, EL students, CTE students, and then how many additional weighted students does that generate if you multiply against those those weights that were in the preceding slide. So if I take the count in O of economically disadvantaged students multiplied by that weight of 0.75 from the front tab, how many weighted students does that generate? And so that's the same exercise for the other categories. And the district sparsity is a little more in depth there. Anyway, it gets you to column AF, which is your total weighted students. So applying all of those weights to all the kid counts. How many students do you have? What is that when you multiply it against an AG is then against that base of 13,200. So that gets to the total foundation formula funding. We've also put in 3 other columns, again, as an effort to kind of be able to compare what we're recommending against your current ed spend. You need to take into account that there's some pieces that are funded within your categoricals currently that we think will be a part of the foundation amount, and places where we know they are spending more on special education and transportation currently than the categorical funds. So this shows you the additional estimated categorical funding for special ed, transportation, then the reduction of categorical funding for flexible pathways, EL services, and small schools, because we, as part of our model, have built that into the base and weights, so you wouldn't separately fund it through a categorical. Same with CTE. To give you, if you take AG and then total that with AH through AK, gives you that total funding that's most comparable to the FY25 ed spend. So again, this AG is what we're recommending out of the formula, but if you want to try to compare that to what you're spending now or generating now, you look at AL. AM is then the 25 FY25 ed spend. And then the last columns are how much funding is that per student using long-term ADM? What's that difference? Then also, what is it when you look at per weighted ADM? So both our proposed funding per weighted ADM, current ed spend per our weighted ADM, and then FY25 PPS, which is your current ed spend divided by your current Act 127 weighted student count. So again, just different ways of trying to compare it with what you're doing now. So that's the current district tab. The current SU and proposed district tabs are the same structure. They are just summing off of the current district tab. So it's now saying, for example, add up all of the districts that are in Addison Central together. In the proposed regional tab, it'd be like adding up all the districts that are in the Champlain Valley region. So I think that's all I have to share on that. And just one thing to name, you'll get to, I think this proposed regional districts, this total line will be the same on any of the tabs, but that's where you can see the total foundation formula funding amount that's recommended. And again, compared to, once you factor in those differences in categorical, how does that compare to your current ed spend? So this would be the line to look at to get that, how does this compare to what we're doing today? And I'm sure you have lots of questions. That was a lot of spreadsheet. Apologize.
I have one question real quick. Sure. Amanda, when you say, when it says the column where it says proposed funding, is that FY25 or
FY25, that'd be correct.
FY25. Okay.
Yeah, we're not recommending implementing till FY28, but all of our estimate figures are shown in FY25 dollars.
Okay, thank you so much.
Just for illustrative purposes.
Yep, for illustrative purposes, to compare it against the most recent year of ed spend that we had to share against.
You're all immersed in spreadsheets,
Spreadsheets are awesome.
which will take us a little while to digest, and I have a feeling we will have lots of questions.
Yeah, I was hoping this was a good orientation to the spreadsheet, so you all
Yes.
can run amok in the spreadsheet. Enjoy.
I'm going to try to find mine. Yes.
Took the liberty of already emailing Julia to ask about the region, the 5-district region column to overlay that instead with the VSBA regions, just so I could do similar analysis with the 11 districts we saw on Tuesday. And if I get that back from Julia, I'll be sure to share it with the whole community.
Okay.
Good work.
Yeah. Okay, I think so. Yeah,
It's good.
spreadsheet out. And it takes a while to digest all of this and probably get some new glasses before we're finished. So that is the end of your presentation, and I'm sure that we will have some questions for you when we finish with this. We'll try and get you in next week, or we can get the questions to you in advance. Rebecca, do you have anything to present to us other than this?
No, I was just here to field questions about the tax piece of how the money all works. And if there's any of those, happy to today. I know we spent a lot of time together yesterday too.
Okay. Senator Chittenden, I'm trying to figure out which one of you actually has a question. I've got this tentative way.
I know.
Feel free to put this question on the shelf if it's not appropriate for this audience, but I do have a question about the state guarantee and just another approach. Would this be a good time to raise that?
Sure.
So from the state guarantee, as I understood it from the presentation yesterday, what I'm wondering, based on overlaying that with a great memo we just got from the Education Commission on States, and I will forward that to your team, but they summarized how many other states do this. And what I saw, what jumped out at me is many of them didn't really take the lift up below the median approach, but instead I saw a lot where on the districts that have a higher grant list to pupil ratio, they actually had, and this has percolated a few times, and I'm curious if this audience might reflect on it and maybe come back with some reflections. But instead of having people discounting, making dollars cheaper for those that have a lower ratio pupil to grant list, but instead actually making dollars more expensive for those that have a higher grant list, basically bringing those above. And when they make it more expensive, that money goes back in to help the overall pool of dollars, thus somewhat stabilizing things. I'm just wondering if that approach has yet been contemplated, or if you see merit in further exploring that. I also kind of like that because I think that builds on our excess spending threshold penalty, which I think was good policy and is good policy that we have in effect now. And any comments on that, either now or in the future, I'd love to hear, but it's something that I'm working to explore over the next week or so.
Fair. Well, I'm certainly interested in that concept and would love to see that memo that you received. And I don't know if any of my colleagues from AOE or APA want to weigh in on the merits of that right now, but it certainly sounds like an interesting idea to discuss from a tax perspective. I can say that the mechanism would work. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That I would add, this is also a kind of a shift in thinking as we're talking about raising local share. The idea of bringing forward a very generous base amount with generous weights is an assumption that you're able to really operate a high quality district with that funding amount. So anything that would be raised additional that would be local would really be what we've been kind of calling the whipped cream. That's the extra, and it would need to be really aligned to a strategic initiative for that district. So it's really thinking about that local share differently. It's really considered an extra on top of a very generous funding amount that should be tied to some sort of strategic objective for the district. So I just wanted to call that out because I know there'll continue to be further conversation around with the local share, how to equalize, but just talking about the local share in general is a little bit different than how we've thought of it before, because we're really funding this proposal with a very generous base and weight that we think will deliver very high quality.
Which I think would actually make a stronger argument with a higher base, the heaviest base in the whole country, to look at it coming from the making dollars more expensive from the top. But that's what I'm trying to understand and follow up. Thank you.
We will look at that.
Thank you. I'm sorry. That's okay.
Thank you for sharing.
Go ahead, Margie.
It was a tentative hand, but then it was not so tentative. So I think I'm next. So thank you, Chair, and thank you,
I'm
Senator.
still in the spreadsheets.
I know, and I'm
You
pivoting.
need to do these by county because I'm having to scroll up and down.
I'm pivoting a little bit, and this may be a question for another day, and maybe it's been asked and I haven't heard, but I'm wondering what kind of extra capacity is going to be needed at the AOE to see this plan to fruition. I haven't seen that in the modeling. And the reason I'm asking is because there is some evidence that, you know, already the AOE is not properly resourced to do the work it needs to do. And I'm thinking of, for example, the 63 independent schools that have missed their renewal dates because the AOE hasn't had time or effort or resource, whatever, to go and do that. And also, there have been some really egregious hazing, harassment, and bullying lawsuits lately that probably would have, those schools and districts probably would have benefited from AOE support and intervention and resources to avoid obviously the harm that was done in the lawsuit. So I'm just wondering if you've thought about what kind of additional staffing the AOE will need to make this happen.
So first, I want to call out that the Agency of Education has not had a strategic plan for some time. And so part of my role in coming in as secretary was to organize a listen and learn tour and really get input from the field, from educators, from parents, from community members around what the priorities are and how the AOE can best support. As part of that process was very data driven. So we've been analyzing data across a number of indicators to understand the current state. All of that is designed to help the agency really realign our support in ways that are going to be most impactful. And you're seeing that we're doing that already in very key ways in terms of helping to promote literacy through Read Vermont. You've mentioned independent schools. There has been a backlog on the independent school approval process that has also been because of some changes in terms of some requirements and some other factors. But those are that I have prioritized, and we have a plan to be able to address that. So some of the work that we're doing and that I've focused on in my role is making sure that we are really aligning our work, that we're prioritizing to address some of the things that may have been maybe unmet in the past or not sufficiently supported. So that's one aspect of the work. The second is that we, as part of the governor's budget proposal, he has recommended additional funding for the Agency of Education to increase our capacity to specifically support with this transition work. And I can be happy to bring back some more details around the scope of that, which is designed to also ensure that we're providing a high level of support around teaching and learning during a transition that can be quite disruptive, along with supporting with the change in terms of operations, district budgeting, and things of that nature. So there is some intention in terms of capacity building and resourcing that also within this transition period.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. So if you could come back with some more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Did that information include the number of positions that you would add to the agency?
So I'll share our proposal. The proposal is designed to support the transition. So it's bucketed into categories of work and around the results that we're hoping to achieve during that time period. So I can bring that forward. In terms of positions, we are being very methodical around that and making sure that any sort of recommendations would be aligned to that strategic plan. And so there's intention around, we are evaluating staffing capacity as we're looking at the ways in which we need to ramp up our support. In some instances, it's realigning our work and reprioritizing. And in other instances, it may be additional staffing needs. And we want to be very thoughtful, strategic, and research driven as we're coming forward with specific staffing requests as we think in the future. But we know that there's additional need for that transition plan. And so we've already baked that in and have a proposal with a $4 million request for that support.
Okay, well, I had a question for Amanda and Justin or Justin. I'm in your base calculation, I'm just looking at things that I'm not seeing. Do you have any, is capital that or debt service costs included? Things like student extracurricular activities. Which category would those be in? And then the M&O costs, how did you calculate the M&O costs? Maybe you said that, but a lot was said, so I didn't catch it all.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. So to answer a couple of them, student extracurriculars would be in that line for student activities.
And I think it's important to point out, you'll see it's the same amount per pupil, elementary, middle, and high school, but within a cost of district, that would be most heavily weighted to the high school to get all those student co-curriculars.
Okay. And what about debt service and capital costs?
And capital and debt service are not included. There, this is really the modeling of what do you need as part of an ongoing funding formula versus capital being kind of a one-time cost. Obviously not a single year, but it's not an ongoing cost. So what's included is the ongoing maintenance and operations to maintain buildings. That number comes from the evidence-based work, and Dr. Pike has got to that by looking at the number of like groundskeepers, the number of custodial staff, the amount for utilities, and builds up to that number. So I apologize, you don't have the breakdown of that within the model, but that's how he gets to that.
Okay, and that, so for debt service and capital costs, I mean, it's not really it's like a 20-year or a 30-year cost. So what happens, how's your model account for that in terms of specifically, especially now with the districts that do have existing debt?
Mm-hmm.
How are you budgeting for that? And then how are you budgeting for any future debt?
Good question. Justin, I wonder if you could speak to that.
There you go. Yeah, so I think right now we do not have a specific line item in for those pieces. And Senator, I think the biggest piece is that it does vary place to place. And so I think part of as we look at the overall governance shifts, so the 5 districts, we're going to have to take a look under the hood for that piece. But I think it's an important piece for us to dig into faster to get back to you.
Yeah, that would be helpful to get your recommendations on that, because I think the distribution of existing debt and also existing reserves in the state is actually a pretty big issue and was a big issue during the Act 46 mergers as well. And so it would be great to get your recommendations on how to model that out, because I think a lot of the debt right now is focused in one area of the state, and then the other areas of the state would have to take on that debt in a way that is really quite concerning, I think, to those areas of the state that would be taking on the debt. So if you could think about that a little further, that would be helpful.
Yeah. Other questions? Are these spreadsheets publicly available? I mean, are they still in-house? I guess we put them up on the screen, but could they be shared with your local school board for feedback?
Yes.
Are these spreadsheet public?
Absolutely, public documents. I think they have already been formatted to be uploaded for House Ed and I think House Ways and Means, but I will double check on that to make sure that you have them in format that you share.
Email, since we seem to have some formatting issues. Okay.
So that last discussion when my colleague here was also mentioning something on the topic, where my mind is going is, and this was actually inspired by a really smart JFO person today and how they're categorizing this topic. One, there's the state guarantee, which is really taking the money in, and then there's how the money's going out. And what we've been talking about today is how the money goes out. There's this third bucket that I'm increasingly seeing as another discussion that fits with all of this from a finance perspective, which is the school construction, debt loads, and how we manage that. I don't see it neatly falling into how the money goes out. I don't know if the administration does, but for me, it seems like a third bucket that deserves a lot of attention. But I'm trying to understand how you all, with your formula as you envision it, does or doesn't address debt loads, existing debts, and possible bonding capacity and school needs, while respecting existing investments from the districts that could be consolidated into larger districts. Just a general comment.
We'll have that as a takeaway to do further analysis. I think that's important. Thank you for raising the question.
Okay. Thank you all. This is a huge volume report. It's going to take us a little while to absorb it, and 4:45 in the afternoon is probably not the best time to do that. But thank you, and we will get questions back, and we will get you back in to talk with us, right? Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Okay, committee. Think we're all gonna need a little time to go through the spreadsheets. Maybe Scott's got.
There's a lot of cells in those spreadsheets.
I gotta find a way to pull out all the Washington County ones, and they got those organized rather than alphabetically by
One
county.
thing that helps, you can lock the header cell so it stays the up and down.
Okay.
That makes it a lot easier.
Hand filter. These are nothing compared to Brad. It was a spreadsheet.
Okay.
There
The ones on the waiting,
There you go. That's right.
yes,
Yeah.
they were eye straining.
It would be good to have some of the facts, but let's take a look at that. The office.
Yeah.
Managers or the.
We have them coming in tomorrow, Friday, so we've asked the business managers and the superintendents. So far, we have two. Have we gotten?
We have Chelsea Myers, she's bringing a couple of other superintendents potentially, and then we have Morgan from, the chief financial officer from Franklin Northeast.
Oh, great. And we asked, we've asked them to bring others, right? And we've said to the person that Senator Hardy wanted to have in, we've asked that he could join us, but we don't have that yet.
Okay, that's Pardon, so that you asked.
Yeah.
Yeah, I emailed them, I haven't heard back.
Okay.
Have we seen a model of what a district will look like? In other words, how many people are going to be there working in the office, and what are they going to be doing compared to what we have right now?
We haven't.
I'm assuming that there's been some calculation of that, because a lot of this is based on the fact that there are going to be these reductions. Now, there are going to be reductions in staffing levels at the schools. There should be reductions in the staffing levels at the district offices. The one thing you always wonder when you see things like this is do you wind up with the same number of people with slightly different titles?
Yeah.
And doing the same thing, because the argument is, well, we still have the same amount of work to do. I don't want to be a skeptic, and I'm sure that they've thought of this and that there's been some modeling done of that. Because the last thing you want to do is, let's say, make the change as suggested, and then find, 6 months later that, well, we can't keep up with the level of work, because we don't have the staff that we used to have to do this. The same amount of work. I'm assuming they've done this, and I suspect that they have that model, but it would be good to just kind of look at that. And then to ask yourself, because from what I hear around the building, the notion of 5 districts is not what a lot of people seem to want. And if they want larger districts, like we got these drawings here of up to 11, some cases 4, what would that look like?
Yeah, then that was the question. How much more would it cost to scale it down to something that might cause a little less culture shock? You may have driven through the towns you're in the same school district with. So I think with the 5, there are towns that people haven't ever been to.
Well, there are also things that you obviously look at is the character of the districts are much, much different. And when you load them all together and you have a an average, if you will, is the average different from every district that exists right now. So just so much so that it creates that shock. I understand that consolidate everything to one big district, state like Hawaii does, may seem appealing at first, but there are issues associated with doing that as well.
Yeah, there are.
I was just struck by the chart that I saw though, in which everything seemed to be added, nothing seemed to be subtracted except this amorphous arrangement in which you're going to reduce the size of the district, but at the same time, the amount of money that you're going to spend to build the new schools.
You're gonna, and yeah, you got built a school for $1 million and we're going to have to build quite a few schools.
Or it'll be helpful also in all of this is to have, we're getting pieces of information from a number of sources here.
Yes.
Is to have one glossary of terms and acronyms
Oh,
for
that,
everything on one piece of paper or multiple pieces of paper, but in one document.
Especially when it comes to governance.
yeah, yeah,
I've seen,
committee discussion.
I don't know. I've seen the spreadsheet which says, like, for a district of this size, this is how many employees it would have, these are, right?
Yeah, and Pike, and that's in the Picus report. And he's coming in tomorrow, next week, Tuesday, when I join
The
me.
administration's proposal.
I think there was something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There,
there is a thing that says one nurse for 7 programs. Yeah,
I'd like to see how Chittenden Valley or Champlain Valley goes from what they are to what it would be.
Yeah, everybody's gonna want that.
Not just this.
and I've got all the square footage in schools and square foot per student on this chart. But what I'm wondering is what is the adequate amount of square footage per student? Maybe it's on the front chart. But how much, I mean, some of them have 500 feet, most of them are 120, 140.
Where are the large central offices gonna be?
Don't know.
Central to the district, I don't know.
Burlington. Well, Burlington is a world. I don't know how much is gonna change in Chittenden County if we do it according to the school district map.
what do you mean, nothing, what, nothing?
Well, you may end up with one supervisory union, but you're pretty compact. It's pretty much the same people. If we do the 5 district and you get put in with Franklin and Addison, then you've got some challenges, but Chittenden is dense enough. So I don't think you're gonna see major busing of kids.
Right.
For 3 hours to get them to a school with more than 50 kids in it.
Right.
On that, I was contemplating about Chittenden. Chittenden's very important, so let's talk about Chittenden.
Yes.
So I was thinking about the
And we're
north
just
parts
leaving
of the county.
Chittenden out of it, because it's irrelevant.
Chittenden County or Thomas Pitt?
No, Chittenden, yeah. I'm Chittenden, not one.
He's good, just leave us alone.
I was thinking Milton, Colchester, Grand Isle, Westford, Essex. I see that as more cohesive for one dominant reason being transportation. I just think of buses having to go through the city. That's where all the congestion is, right around the big city of Burlington. So I'm wondering if that is more cohesive to have kids, less time in buses during concentrated rush hour traffic, and it would break up the debt issues we were talking later. That I just don't want to be in the same school district as Center Mountain, so.
Well, we're just
And then you do
the
the south.
western Chittenden.
Yeah, so I was thinking north and south, with that way Burlington's in the middle where the transportation might be less of a factor for kids waiting in buses.
Okay, yeah.
But that's a notion that.
You wouldn't do the private.
That's the kind of granular knowledge you need to really.
Yeah,
Decisions outlines.
Yeah.
What the city.
And that's why.
Yeah.
And that line up.
You didn't think about it when you're doing it. Yeah, it would better.
Colchester and the Islands is one
Let's
side
deal with
district.
Milton and.
Melvin's Westford there.
We're good.
I'll talk about Chittenden County all the time.
On western Chittenden and central Vermont, because on that done, because we were 14 or 15 on every did. So we were kind of in the middle. We aren't the big city. We aren't the kingdom. We don't have mountains that, I guess we got fuel score, but there's only 24 people or 12 people that live there and no school. We're relatively flat. How do you divide that up? And then how, when you've got a fair amount of property and income, well, how do you make it work there? Then how do you adjust that up to places with less? Well, they got a lot more property, but a lot less property wealth than income wealth. Unless they get the sewer line or the septic system into Montgomery around Jay Peak, and they may well grow. I should have asked Bobby, but apparently it's become very controversial. It costs a lot more than it did a few years ago.
That's expensive.
And it's gotten bigger, but I actually rode up to look at those towns and the general store that they wanted to put in the town septic. A town, each people they just do downtown, so
We do not have to divide divide districts by congestion.
no.
Sure, it was just a fleeting thought.
No, thanks for your area.
Hey, Montpelier has congestion. We have a 5-minute rush hour every morning and every night with the state employees.
Think about it, it's Winooski River, it's the bridge or the congestion points, and so maybe that's might be a natural dividing line. If it goes right through the county. Winooski, Colchester, Wilton, Essex, Westford, east side of the ridge.
We can deal with those issues at the end,
Or some other. community.
after we steal all your money.
Yeah.
But we've got some major questions, and just start looking at the spreadsheets, jot down the questions. I think everybody probably needs to give their brain a little. And we are going to solve the cost of healthcare, right?
Yes, we are.
Well, health, and that isn't figured in here anywhere.
Right, in favor pricing?
That's in the mix.
It's an HSA.
That is in the mix. But mostly it's getting the cost under, you don't want to do reference-based pricing if you're gonna put your small rural hospitals under.
You can do
The
it.
theory is you'll pay them less. You'll pay the Medicare plus.
I'm not saying they wouldn't hate that, but wouldn't you be the real loser in that?
UVM would be the real loser.
They're not gonna- Okay.
You can, but you
Insurance
can,
companies love it.
you can modify the reference-based pricing
Yes.
to customize it to the type of hospital and the type of care.
It
It is, that's kind of the point of it. And if you give the Great Mountain Care Board sufficient authority and direction to do it, then
It is on the list in our master committee bill. Green Mountain Care Board, I think, owns a seat in the committee.
Smith should go on the Green Mountain Care Board.
Mike Smith is going somewhere. I don't know if he's applied for the care board yet, but I don't think he's retiring just yet. I
No.
sure they're taking that wager.
Are we still, are we done?
We are done.